to do a little more table setting because Allie has agreed and thankfully agreed to help. We don't have Jenna. We don't have Oregon Consensus. We don't have Jenna. For those who haven't heard, Jenna had her baby. Everything is going great, and she is on maternity leave, and we all hoped it would go this way. So that said, we still don't have Jenna, and that means that we don't have. What we're trying to do at DSL is figure out how we piece together support related to meeting scheduling, facilitation, and the like. And so for today, I'll work to move on the substance of the pieces that we're discussing. And then Allie, thank you for agreeing to do some light touch facilitation and move things along. I'll flash on my screen real quick the agenda that we have for today. And then while I'm doing that, I also wanted to say, and I think it went out in the email, the refresh email last night, Tom DeLuca reached out and said he wanted to try to make the meeting today. We're in a spot where we basically, the approach to this advisory group is everybody who was on the prospective board, there's an open door to work in an advisory capacity for DSL as part of this advisory group on the next steps in transitioning the Elliott to the Elliott State Research Forest, consistent with the land board parameters. And I think we had heard from all of you and hadn't heard clearly from Tom or Colin with the CT Klutzy whether OSU and the tribe wanted to formally be part of this advisory group. So in essence, we're leaving the door open, and Tom had indicated previously that OSU has some things to still think through about what the new parameters actually mean, and what will the research on the forest look like before OSU can formally decide where it's going to land. And it's a bit of a cart or chicken and egg where, like, well, we're talking about a lot of that here. So do you want to join in or not? And Tom wanted to make it today, but he can't because there's another board meeting going on. And so Katie and Jen are here from OSU, and I just wanted to highlight and touch on that before we move forward. Okay. So thanks to you both for making it, and even though we know we're in a position of kind of waiting on an affirmative, yes, OSU is wanting to be part of the advisory group or not, and we'll figure that out. Quick agenda check. This is what we have, and I will, okay, there we go. I will zoom in on it. So the way Allie and I have talked about dividing this up, we'll wrap up with the first item on the agenda, the greetings, and then the recap of the land board meeting and the path forward. And then the big bulk of this meeting is going to be a discussion about the draft management structure as well as the draft research forest oversight board structure. And that relates to the materials that were sent in advance of the meeting. And the real objective is just to spend about 45 minutes on each to get advice and feedback from you all as an advisory group. These products are also being vetted internally by DSL right now, as well as the land board offices. And so, sorry, multiple pings going off. So we're in a situation where we need to keep things moving based on the timeline that the land board gave us, and doing that based on the direction of working with an advisory group, which is you all, and then bringing feedback through the advisory body and from DSL and the internal and land board office vetting that we're doing, bring things back into the February 13th land board meeting. And so obviously there's not a lot of time between now and the next land board meeting, especially given when materials need to be done. But these pieces, the management structure and the oversight board, are really critical pieces for feedback. And so that's our purpose today. And we'll get to the, outlining the next meeting on February 7th at the end of this meeting. But that's the bulk of why we're here. And so last but not least, just to remind folks, we'll adjourn at 2 p.m. instead of 3 p.m. today. In addition to the other messy things happening around Oregon with power outages, flooding, and whatnot, Vicky had intended to be here today, but she has had basically she's without phone and internet at the moment. So, Allie, I think that's right, right? Well,
Oh,
Allie's on mute.
she actually had a hacking issue. So totally separate conundrum than the weather. Weather is dicey where she is, but she's got another problem. So she got a pass.
Yeah, so add to the mess. But Bill, thank you for being here. And what I thought we'd do before we dive into the management structure and the oversight board structure is quick agenda check. Do you all want to add anything or disagree or say anything about the agenda, or does it all look good to you?
I'm fine.
Okay, I'll keep going and jump in if not. And before we move into the bulk of the meeting, I think the quick recap here is just, I don't think we don't want to spend all the time rehashing the December 13th land board meeting. We've sent out the directional path forward that was discussed and confirmed at that land board meeting related to creating the research forest. And so I think the high level points are, this will be a research forest. That's the land board's desire and intent. And they confirm that pretty clearly. And they also confirm the desire for public engagement and transparency and feedback along the way from an advisory body. And so the way we're looking at this is the advisory body. We're publicly noticing the meetings. It's advisory to DSL, and Vicky is the director. And so we don't have what was the Senate Bill 1546 Perspective Board. Doesn't exist. It's one of the many parts of 1546 that just don't exist at this point. So while we're in the tweener period of moving from here to the research forest, the intent is to use this board to inform what the land board would then adopt and what Vicky would then appoint as a board for the research forest. And we're doing that, having that discussion at the same time we're having the conversation about what management would look like under DSL doing the management, which is different than before, where it was Oregon State doing both the management and the research. And so with DSL doing the management of the forest, we still have the question out there around who will be the research entity. It's still a research forest. It obviously needs research partners or partners plugged in, and we're working with OSU first, and hopefully coming back to OSU playing the research entity role. But those discussions are ongoing and not front and center in this meeting. So I wanted to see if there was anything, Bill or Allie, to add from the land board meeting, or Ryan. Ryan was highlighted at the land board meeting, but not at his behest. So, Bill, did I miss anything about land board high level recap? And then I also wanted to see if others on the advisory group had any reactions to it before we jumped into the management structure discussion.
Again, mute,
Oh,
Bill.
Bill, muted.
You're 2 for 2.
Sorry, I've got a granddaughter playing loud music in the background, so I was trying not to um, have you. Hopefully, you guys can't hear that. Anyway, Brett, thank you very much. No, you covered it really well. I just want to reiterate the commitment from all of the department and the land board. We want to make this research forest work, and so just commitment to working together and moving forward to accomplish that.
Thanks, Bill. So yeah, are there any questions or things that are on folks' mind related to the December 13th meeting that we should talk about before we dive in? Not necessarily asking for it, but we haven't all gotten together in a while, and that was a big meeting. And so it's a chance to touch on some things if you all want to real quick before we go into the meat of why we're here.
I'm good, Brett. It doesn't sound like things have changed a whole lot since that December direction and so forth. So I think I'm good.
Okay. Thanks, Jack. Well, let's talk management structure then. That's the main point. And I'll bring up the materials in a second to do a little walkthrough. I'm also going to ask, I know we've got Ryan, thank you for being here. And oh, it looks like Jean is on too. Great. And Allie's here and Bill. So stage setting, based on the direction from the land board to make sure the Elliott becomes the Elliott State Research Forest and as managed by DSL, we've been doing a lot of work internally to prepare for this meeting and discussion, as well as the broader related need to structure out how DSL would approach managing the Elliott. And that's primarily a matter of what are the key roles and duties that need to be covered. And then how do those roll up into an organizational chart and positions. So the broader context is we have that direction. We have some capacity in place at DSL. We don't have nearly enough capacity to fully manage the forest as it's needed. And so we will be in a position of needing to do some hiring. But the management structure will help us figure out what that looks like, how much, what positions, and then where we might also be relying upon existing capacity that we have, as well as contracting out work. So the money to do all this, I think to touch on it real quick, in the near term, before revenue from timber harvest start to flow in, the legislature advanced a little over $4 million in the last session that was otherwise going to go to the Elliott State Research Forest Authority that would then do hiring and funding of a management approach. We are going into this upcoming legislative session seeking the legislature's blessing to allocate that funding to DSL, given that the the authority, the new state agency under Senate Bill 1546 won't exist. And then that would be part of the funding that DSL uses to advance the management structure in the near term. So let me pull up the documents, and then the main point is going to be getting to your feedback. These documents are heavy on content, and so I'm going to not dive into the super details, but hit them at a high level and trust or hope in the fact that folks have done some advanced reading and homework. So this first document that you all received is our internal approach. And again, we're still doing internal vetting within DSL and the land board offices. But what we've tried to do was, instead of just rolling right into, okay, what positions do we need to hire? We wanted to back it up and talk about, okay, what are the key roles related to managing a forest, a research forest like the Elliott, and what are the key duties tied to those roles and some details around them. So that's what you see in the green columns here. In short, they're administrative, budget, and policy roles, a key role related to research coordination with whoever the research entity or entities are, communications, and I'll ask folks like Allie and Jean and Ryan and Bill to chime in on some of this in a second, but just to round out the role areas, partnership and community engagement. This was always something that came up as in our conversations previously related to the OSU budgets. We had capacity in the big full funding budget from OSU, but not in the scaled back version. And I think in our internal discussions, the need for strong partnerships and strong community engagement is just frankly really high on the Elliott. And so we want to be sure we capture that and cover that. There are some other roles here on page 2 related to broader planning and compliance. And so this is, betting on the come of getting a habitat conservation plan with Endangered Species Act take permits, plus getting a forest management plan done, both a bridge plan and a longer term plan. And then all of the commitments related to those documents, related to monitoring and reporting and other activities. It's a dedicated key role that we need to be sure we've got covered in the form of staff. These pieces here I'm going to come back to around timber sale planning and implementation, all the way down through reforestation site prep, as well as other project planning, including the road related pieces of the Elliott design, as well as the habitat restoration projects that are contemplated and built in through the HCP. And then Shutter Creek, which is no small item in and of itself, but a little less central to the actual management of the forest. I'll come back to all these. They relate to some things that I'm hoping Ryan can help talk through with us about our intended approach, because you see it's largely a contracted role. If you look at this column on in the orange on the right. And then the other key roles relate to kind of things that often seem to get overlooked in governance and organization and administering an effort like this. So data and IT, contracts and procurement, and human resources. I'll come back. What I want to do is just clarify with you all these positions, and I'll highlight them: a forest manager, a forester, a biologist. Those would all be contemplated new hires, and bodies that we don't have currently. And so we do have Ryan, a great forester, but Ryan can't be everywhere and doing everything for the agency. So having a dedicated Elliott specific forester is the intent. The forest manager, we need to call it a manager rather than a forest director, because the agency already has a director, and this person would be working under the larger DSL hierarchy. And then a biologist, which is really key to HCP implementation and ensuring that we're meeting our obligations related to monitoring and reporting. as well as somebody who has biologist science background other than forestry, who can really plug into the restoration projects, both the aquatic and the terrestrial, including thinning. So that's the intent there. We have a series of other, so this other new position column. I'll get to the next document, I guess, and talk through that more. We have frankly, just a lot of these roles and duties. We don't have existing capacity at DSL to cover. And we didn't want to try to overload and dilute the focus of the forest manager, forester, and biologist position. So we are contemplating other new positions, which I'll get to in the organizational chart hierarchy document. It's, I think, visually just easier to track there. And then there is a bunch of existing DSL capacity that we feel like we can draw upon. And in some ways, when you compare this approach to creating a whole new state agency, which was the path that Senate Bill 1546 had things on, it's nice and will result in some relative or comparative cost savings to be able to tap some existing capacity at DSL, and plug people that are already hired into the roles as part of their additional and broader duties for the agency in helping us advance the Elliott State Research Forest program within DSL. So that covers existing capacity would relate to budget accounting, communications, although there's a caveat that I wanted to tap Allie to talk through. We can't do everything with his existing staff. Some of the related to partnerships and community engagement, where we are entering contracts and agreements, we feel like we can cover the administrative part of setting up contracts and agreements and overseeing them with existing staff. All this, again, subject to, we got to verify it with all of the relevant staff, but we've had a team of us within DSL kind of thinking through this. And then human resources, a lot of the data and IT stuff, it's question marks because we're still vetting it, but we're feeling like we can tap into existing capacity at DSL for those things. So lastly, and then I want to bring other people in and turn to you all, contracts. Contracted resources would be key in the areas of communications, but most heavily in the areas of operation. I mean, not just setting up the operations, but actually operationalizing management on the forest. So this relates to timber sale planning, restoration project planning. We probably have, related to research coordination, a decision to make about this key research coordinator position. Let me just switch documents really quick. Sorry for the confusion. This will be more clear. Okay. Okay. This position here, research coordinator, it's positioned in ellipsis dots because we still need to, and this is where advice on all this is helpful, but whether that position lives within the research entity and is funded by DSL, or whether that position lives within DSL, is part of the conversation that's needed. And then on a lot of the contracted services I wanted to bring in Ryan here and then go to Allie next to talk about communications, because we don't have a new hires kind of pinned in or penciled in, but we do have it flagged as a need, if not right out of the gate on the Elliott, down the line. So I'd like, Ryan, if you could kind of cover for folks, and I'm going to go off. I'm going to take this material down just so everybody can see each other better. But I can bring it back up anytime you want. I'm hoping you can kind of talk through the thinking that we've run through around why we're looking at contracted services as an approach to doing these key roles around timber sale planning, reforestation, other project planning and implementation, and broader compliance. And then after that, Allie, I'll come back to you around the communications, filling in some of the space around how we're thinking about communications.
Hey, Brett, before we do that, let's take a question here, or maybe a couple questions, and then maybe I can jump back in after that. So why don't you go ahead and go, Mike?
Oh, good. Yeah, sorry, I'm not seeing hands. Let me take everything down.
Yeah, Brett, I just had one question, and maybe you covered it already. On your chart that had everything, the first thing you put up, you've got some large X's and some small X's, different colors, and I wonder if there was significance in those and what they meant.
Yeah, the small X's are supporting roles. So it would be part of the duties that would need to be covered in any position, but it wouldn't be the lead role. The big X is basically the lead role that we would need somebody to be playing. And then the small dot is basically a support role. Bob.
Yeah, sorry, I had to leap in and out a little bit there, so my questions may be repetitive. I had a big tree come down. Unfortunately, by the way, that tree house that I did all my meetings in during 2019 and 20, it's gone. It's damn trees. So I'm curious. One thing, just as context, is all the money is that basic principle that the money that comes off the Elliott goes back into the Elliott? I mean, is that or because I'm wondering about these positions that are sort of within DSL. I mean, do we kind of contract with them and pay them for a third of FTE? So I want to make sure that basic principle, or understand whether that basic principle is still in place, that the money is kind of kept in an internal loop. And then I'm curious about how this stacks up against the other prior proposal for kind of minimum staffing, what percentage of that we have here? How much have we shrunk? It looks like pretty substantially, but I just want to kind of get a sense of how much.
Yeah.
Oh, and Shutter Creek, are we paying for that now, or because that was always kind of outside of this, but is that now? Well, how does that fit in? Those three things. I'm sorry.
Okay. Got it. No, those are all good. You've got one question in 27 parts. I'll do the last one first. So Shutter Creek, I think the intent is it is a separate conversation from how the management structure for the Elliott sets up, but it's not separate in the context of what DSL needs to or how DSL needs to think about its capacity for managing all things Elliott. So that's why it's mentioned in here. And the funding for it would not be coming from harvest revenue or Elliott generated revenue in any form. We have a $4 million grant from Federal Housing and Urban Development, and that's to basically get started on the process for the vision for redeveloping Shutter Creek into a headquarters. And part of that process will be crafting the vision and testing what kind of partnerships do we actually have up there. Do we have enough to really make it work? And then moving into a redevelopment plan, which to get through a full redevelopment plan and process with all the environmental reviews and compliance. That'll take more funding that'll come separately. The other part of that $4 million HUD grant is to basically make sure Shutter Creek is maintained. And we have staff and cost. That the short of it is we have staff and we're already incurring costs on that. The other parts of the question, I'll try to make sure I hit them all, Bob, but if I don't, come back or remind me. We haven't costed out everything yet. So you can see in the budget box on this slide, it's blank. But the general principle is, let's talk through the management structure first and get the feedback from the advisory group and internally as well. And then based on that feedback, we can work on costing things out. The overall approach and principle guiding cost and expenditures, though, is yes, the money from the Elliott and the research-based harvest on the Elliott would fund the management structure, setting Shutter Creek aside, but we're not set up for that yet. And, you know, obviously the management needs to happen before the money can flow and cart and horse. And if there's other revenue coming in from other sources, that would also be funding this management structure. But the overall principle is, let's set up and fund or ensure funding exists first for the base structure of what it would take to manage the forest. See where that gets us relative to how much money we currently have, assuming the legislature is agreeable on advancing or moving the $4 million over to DSL this session, and then look at the kind of budget we would have based on funding an operational structure like this. What money is going to be there above and beyond that for research? So this is probably a next meeting issue, talking through what potential budgets and dollars look like. But those are the principles guiding it. And today we really wanted to focus on your input related to the key roles and duties, and then this structural stuff. Did I miss any part of that, Bob?
Yeah, that was super helpful. But yes, the first part, I'm not sure I heard a full answer to it. Maybe there isn't one yet. But under the former model, basically, if the Elliott generates $10 million, $10 million stays with the Elliott, whether we spend $3 million or $5 million in any given year. Is that still the principle?
Yeah. And we're also talking to the legislature, and I'll ask Gene to be ready to reel me in if I make a mistake here, but we're also asking the legislature for the ability to essentially set up a separate fund, an Elliott specific fund within DSL, so that the dollars that come in can be put in the appropriate place, separate from DSL's other accounts and program funds. Gene, did I get that right?
Yep, correct.
Whew. All right, thank you. Okay. Any other hands up? I'm not able to see.
Nope, you're good, Brett.
Okay. And I'm not, there were other slides and materials. For the sake of time, I don't want to, really quick. This slide covers the details. It's a different visual way of depicting that first document that I put up related to duties and roles. This breaks it into positions, and you can see, Mike, all of the big X's in that first document are the lead role duties that are described here in these blue boxes. So this goes into the detail of what we're contemplating for roles and duties tied to these specific positions here. I'm not going to get into the details on this. I just wanted to do a quick overview. Same thing for, these are the positions where we'd be going outside. We'd either be providing funding to a research entity for the research coordinator director position, or we could bring it into DSL and hire it ourselves, but for purposes of discussion, it's positioned for today anyway as a, we would need somebody in this role. Here are the duties under work description, and we'd go out and fund it. And we'd also do external funding through contracts for all of these roles in these blue boxes. And this is where I'll bring you back in a second, Ryan. But while you're talking, I'll leave this one up because it relates to the key things that would be done within these contracted services. And then the last slide is what we have, basically what work and duties would be ascribed to existing DSL staff in these areas. So I don't want to, these are detailed documents, and I kind of want to make sure we get to your feedback, but I think it's important, Ryan, if you can talk through real quick our approach to these blue boxes here down through excluding communications, just so folks kind of get our thinking, and then let's open it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well, Brett. The thing that we wanted to do is keep a pretty small internal staff. And most of that just has to do with staying nimble and efficient because we're not a forestry agency. And so sort of the broad level planning and management can be from these, the forest manager, the forester, and the biologist to begin with. And then a lot of the implementation of what we figure out in terms of forest management activities is more efficient to be contracted out. And this would just be initially. It could be long term that once we get our feet in the ground, we could actually start hiring more internal staff and doing less contracting. But certainly it makes a lot more sense to, because we're going to do pretty slow rollout of looking to do timber sales and planning. And so it's not going to just go, oh yeah, we're just going to do everything all at once. And so we need this slow rollout, and mostly it just makes sense to contract those services out. So like you have here, we got the timber sale planning implementation. That again is going to be directed by DSL staff and the board. And then we would look to contract that out to have all of the, layout crews, the administering the contract, selling the timber sales, that sort of stuff. And then the log accountability, which is a big thing, that needs to be done outside of our existing internal staff. And then there's the other side of it being reforestation, young stand management, all that. Again, this takes a lot of work to do. And we would look to contract that stuff out as well. Again, as directed by DSL and the board, et cetera. So that's pretty much it. And then again, we don't want to staff up too quickly and then have to lay people off. So doing this with a small staff makes sense now, and then we'll just kind of see where we end up as this thing grows into the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, and thankfully, even though there hasn't been timber harvesting happening on the Elliott for quite some time now, it's not like nothing's been happening. DSL has a contractor who's been working on the forest and is still under contract in Titan Kelly. We have OSU has been doing a variety of work setting up research, but also employing local folks who are more familiar with the forest around doing things related to timber cruises and other things. So, and then there are ongoing conversations with tribal entities too. So we don't feel like we're, I guess maybe gut check you, Ryan. I guess I don't feel like we're, by contracting these services out, operating in the dark. There's a lot of, I think, good space and people to tap into.
Yep, absolutely.
So before we go to the communications part of the discussion, anything for Ryan or kind of the thinking related to this contracted approach? Because it is different than just trying to bring it all inside.
Yeah, this is Mike. I would just, I fully understand how you're thinking in this realm. I do just say go at it slowly, cautiously. The big things that I think of and that give me a little bit of heartburn is log accountability and the contracting itself of the timber sales. You know, we contract out a bunch of different things here at the tribe, but when it comes to the accountability of the logging and the money coming in and all, we do that in-house. And so we've got, you know, no potential for a contractor to mess with some of that. I don't know that it would be in particular any advantage to them, but just something to watch and all.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Mike. And yeah, there'd be really direct involvement from DSL staff with that potential contractor who's doing that work. So it's not like we're going to be contracting directly with loggers or anything like that. We're gonna have a consultant that is done forest management and has that that log accountability staff in place and all the programs you need to track scale receipts and all that kind of stuff. And we would be watching that very closely. Yeah, there wouldn't be a lot of separation there.
Okay.
Jack, I saw you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I just had a more general question about kind of the org structure, and I didn't know if you wanted to take that now or not.
Yeah, let me put a pin in it really quick and just ask, does anybody really like it? Or does anybody think we're totally crazy for thinking about this contracted approach? Not just related to timber sales, but restoration projects, and that can include, you know, agreements with groups like watershed groups or associations and others. Potentially tribes too. If we're somewhere between love it and totally crazy, I think that's part of the barometer check that we want to do here. So just checking.
I would say that's
You
where
know,
I'm at.
So,
Okay. Well, let's
what
go to the
I-
org. I'll pull the org chart up, Jack. Sorry,
Okay.
did I cut you off?
No, that's all right. I think this makes sense, kind of what you're proposing here. I do have a little bit of heartburn with not having some dedicated staff. You know, I just feel like it's hard to understand kind of our timing, how much we're how far this goes down the road with kind of being run by by DSL staff. And I'm not saying there's anything bad with that, and we have to have that, but I would I'd like to see the day where we do have some staff hired and dedicated to this, kind of sooner than later. And specifically, other than that kind of moaning and groaning, I wonder if what you're feeling or what discussions you've had about the forest manager position. It's obviously a little bit different than a director or an acting director. But what were your thoughts on timing of that? Is that something that could happen fairly soon? I'm struggling with trying to figure out where we eventually get some staff on board and are able to have dedicated people on these things.
Yeah. So, and I think to be clear, these are all, so everything from the forest manager down through this row of potentially 5 positions, but at least 4 would be DSL staff, in-house staff. And this forester would be a different person separate from Ryan. And then this position here, the research coordinator role, this is obviously part and parcel of like, we have to work out who the research entity is, and keep talking with OSU about where this is going to land, but we didn't want to ignore this role. So I guess my sense, Jack, is we want to start as soon as possible on filling out these boxes, the forest manager down to these positions. Some of them, like the biologist, for example, and I'll ask any others to chime in here. Assuming we get permits, I mean, part of the thinking here is we want to be set up to be able to operate a forest and not have a forest idle for longer. So part of the setup is these positions, and assuming we get permits under the Endangered Species Act come this fall, what can we be doing operationally in 2025 on the ground? And this biologist position will be important to have on board to make sure we've got staff who can ensure compliance with the HCP, and this forester. I mean, I think we can ask, and Ryan can be as generous as he can with his time and helping to set some things up. But this position is going to be really important to making sure all of these kinds of contracts are sound and in place. And then, this staffer around policy and partnership engagement, I wanted to touch on that a little bit when we talk about communications, because it's really potentially that one can wait a little longer, but I guess we feel like we can do some things with communications internally, but for the public outreach and engagement and the pieces that need to be done around operations planning and the vetting of that, as well as building partnerships that are going to be critical to managing on the Elliott, we want somebody in that as soon as possible. And then this administrative assistant piece is just the glue that helps the gear. Well, glue doesn't help gears run. The oil that helps gears run. So I think we feel like we need to be moving on these as soon as possible. I guess one thing to note is we are in contracted services looking at and putting together through a contract and bringing in some help, as well as relying on people like Ryan and myself and others, putting together a biennial or an operations plan that would be not as robust as you might imagine in a full biennial operations plan, but basically what would we do right out of the gate, assuming we get permits in the fall and are adequately set up to do operations in 2025. And so that's something that we want to move through a contract now, while we're also working on the FMP and setting up these broader positions. So I hope that I'm trying to answer as directly as I can, and hopefully I did. And I don't know, Ryan or others, if you've got feedback internally.
Yeah, so Jack, a couple challenges too we have is that really from a budgetary standpoint, we don't want to staff up too quickly, too big, because I don't think we've got the funds to do that. And so that's part of the challenge, because we're not going to hit the ground, logging 17 million board feet, year one kind of thing. We're going to be doing this slow and figuring out what's going on, cutting our teeth. The second challenge is that when we hire these, they're going to be limited duration. That's the way we have to do it, as I understand it, from an agency standpoint, which makes these hires difficult to do anyway, because you've got a pretty controversial forest that's been, kind of battered around over the last few years. And so we're going to have a challenge getting even a short staff on board, knowing that we're going to be having to do these as limited duration. I don't know if that changes if we get legislation in place and have this South Sloughish type of arm of DSL that would help that, but that's going to be one of the challenges as well. And so I think from a financial efficiency standpoint, we're going to have to go slow. But it could be long term that we end up getting our feet on the ground, figuring this thing out, and then can eventually go away from contracting services and bring more staff on board.
Yeah, that's good. I thanks. I appreciate that, and I realize that there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of you know, a little bit of an odd dance here we're trying to figure out in this interim period. So, yeah, I appreciate that. I guess I'm just like everybody else, hoping that we can move more quickly than not, but that's difficult to do at this point.
How about others on just feedback, overall take on the org chart? I still do want to touch on communications and partnership and community engagement in a second, but just going to put a pause in the space and see if anybody comes into it.
Yeah, Brett, I'll jump in. This is Keith. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, good.
Yeah. In the end, I think in terms of impact on the forest, as long as there's a research entity, and I just throwing out that if it's OSU, then really I think in practice the impact on the forest is not much different than we were doing anyway. You're going to have a slightly different structure, but what we achieve on the forest in terms of research and management and HCPs and FMPs is we're in the same zip code that we were going to be in anyway. It's just that we've reinvented it a little bit because of the need to do so. I think in practice, this is going to work remarkably like what we were heading towards anyway.
I would generally agree with that, Keith, except to note, I think there's a key need to make sure, you know, back to the things we've heard before, it's a research forest, and so making sure the management and the research are integrated. That's the key need to make sure with this new structure that we're still achieving, and that's where that research coordinator position I think is really important. But I think partly it's there are, you know, operationalizing work on a forest is one thing, doing it in the context of research tied to those operations is another, and that's where the critical need is around figuring out the research entity question. And I think, without speaking for them, but kind of, I think OSU is probably really thinking about that right now. Like, how is DSL going to come out proposing to structure management, and can that work in the context of how OSU is thinking about how it would want to structure a research program? And are we still as close as you say we are, Keith? So I think that's probably the elephant that we still need to make sure we're addressing and have conversations with OSU about, or if it's not OSU, making sure we're talking to other research partners. But the approach is keep talking with OSU and hopefully work it out.
Understood. Thanks. And again, I think as you pointed out, but I'm assuming that we all remember that this is a research forest, and that first and foremost, and that things translate from there. And I appreciate the DSL reemphasizing that.
Any others on the yeah, and thanks, Keith. Any others on the org chart and kind of the approach to contracted services, existing capacity, and then new hires and kind of the duties tied to them? I know we need to move forward into the other part of our discussion today related to the oversight board, but I also wanted Allie to chime in a bit, and see if Gene and Bill had anything that I've not talked about yet around communications, but before tapping them, general feedback on what you've seen and read in the draft materials or seen in our reading now? And back to the full screen. All right. Reading Allie's face for how long I let the silence tick tock.
I think I can break the silence. I feel like this is a group that's really good at speaking up when they've got something to say. Brett, do you just want me to quickly? I also want a time check because we're at just about 1 o'clock. Do you want me to quickly talk about the thought for the comms and engagement work?
Yeah, I think
Bob
it's important, and
Salinger,
we can buy back some time.
Bob's saying I intimidate him. Well, you are not exactly the least scary person in the whole wide world either, Bob Salinger. So I feel complimented and also sad at the same time. But Brett, yes, you want me to do that quickly?
I think it's important, yeah, and then
Okay.
see if Gene and Bill have anything to, and we can, I think we'll be okay on our overall time.
Okay. So just first, I think an orientation to how communication work is going to weave through everything that happens in the research forest realm. You know, we all these roles is something that you're going to want to have a good communications and engagement partnership with, because it really does touch everything. So like I work with our leadership on our budget, messaging, and outreach strategy, writing the narratives, developing the supporting materials, and then all of those other roles, you know, whether it's your legislative work or your research work or your policy work or partnership pieces, those are all going to have a need for some kind of communication to support, to really work with the program team to identify who are we aiming at, what do we want to make happen with these communications, how can we get the things we need to do it. So it really is a comprehensive need. And the way DSL makes sure that we support our programs is by like each of our positions has some expertise that we lend to the entire agency, and we have an assigned program area or topic that we support. So with this, I mean, we're adding a major program, and we're adding a major new program. So I am seeing, you know, the three big pieces are really, what do you need in terms of communications to start a program off on the right foot? And it really is program identity with all like the graphic and just what does this program do? What does it stand for? Development of that identity plus all the associated materials, as well as an overarching communications plan for the Elliott State Research Forest. And my advice would be to contract that out. Like use the resources you have, get those foundational pieces in place. And from there, you know, DSL does have some capacity within our existing comms program to support implementation. The thing that we do not have capacity to support is the engagement, public participation, partnership type work. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of that with the research forest, from the oversight board that meets regularly, needing to make sure those meetings are noticed, from all the different work threads that have, you know, plans to develop and public processes that need to be associated with those planning efforts, to just the day-to-day, like making sure that we are working with stakeholders, with communities, with all of the folks that need to be involved in a research forest. You want to make sure you have good built-in dedicated support for that. So, you know, my thought is DSL's existing communication staff on the communications pieces, which are really like, what do we say? How do we say it? With a good comms plan in piece, can provide that oversight and expertise in implementing those. If you have a good person who has like primarily, you know, primarily charged with the public engagement pieces. And that's, Brett, what are you calling that position now? Is it an engagement and partnership person with all the realm of like engagement, participation, partnership, stakeholders? If you've got somebody good living in that, I think with some solid communication skills there and some guidance from the experts that are currently on the DSL staff, we could get away with that for now. But I want to be really like upfront about like, you should be investing a lot in those participation, relationship, stakeholder pieces, because it's really key. And we can't do it with what we have. One last note on that. I think in this initial period, as we get going, as we're hiring, we might want to look at contracting for design and implementation of public processes that accompany some of the planning processes, with DSL staff guiding, providing oversight, but then with the execution of that and development of the participation processes really falling on contracted work to make sure we do it right.
Yeah, thank you, Allie. This is thank you. That helps. So why you see it the way you see it is, under existing DSL capacity, the bottom row on the org chart, we have communications, and that covers the things that Allie said we can, likely cover internally, but it's this position, and that's why this comms position here is not a solid, yes, we will hire a comm staff. But what Allie said about the needs around public engagement and community outreach and engagement and partnership, that's part of why we're building this position out, and where, a lot of its focused work and duties would be. It's kind of a hybrid position though. So the other part of this, if you remember back to the DSL budgets when we were advancing, the OSU budget and the DSL administrative agency budget, the PA3 or policy analyst 3 position in that budget scenario has now been blended into this position, where basically it's a person who would help on the policy front with, issue research and writing, and, being able to support the forest manager during the budgeting and legislative process, but also help around partnership outreach, including tribes, and doing solid, meaningful engagement of tribes and other partners. And then what Allie said around just the variety of public engagement and just good accountability, transparency, it's always come through as a key need in the Elliott. And like Allie said, we don't have enough capacity to just build in a big new program like the Elliott and rely on existing staff. So with that, I'm going to take the screen down, but I wanted to reopen it before we move to the oversight board conversation to see. And like Allie said, we don't have enough capacity to just build in a big new program like the Elliott and rely on existing staff. So with that, I'm going to take the screen down, but I wanted to reopen it before we move to the oversight board conversation to see if, I guess, Bill, Jean, did I miss anything that's on your mind? The last thing I'll say is we do have some experience and models to draw on. And so a lot of that structure and the way we're thinking about this is drawn on based on kind of the how DSL's worked on the South Slough Estuarine Reserve approach in that program. It's not apples to apples, and I spent a chunk of time talking to Bree Yednock, the director of the reserve, and it was really helpful to get her download of how they've set that up, how it's been working over the years, what could be done better, how she sees things as different on the Elliott than what they do. But we're trying to draw upon the internal experience with that program, as well as other thinking to inform how we're structuring out an approach to the Elliott. Yeah, so Bill, Jean, anything that I've been doing a lot of the talking, and I actually don't love that. So did I miss anything? And then I want to just, before we switch topics, make sure we've got time to hear anything more from advisory group members. Oh, muted, Bill.
These headsets have their own little secret belly mute. That's what got me that time. Anyway, Brett, I was just saying that no, you're doing a good job of laying things out and presenting the information that we needed to share. Jean did need to drop off to go to another meeting. I will say about those positions that we are starting the process of developing our budget and position requests for the 25-27 biennium, and so we're including those positions that are on that org chart in that request. Likely, we're not going to wait until next July, a year from July, to hire those positions. So they'll be LDs at first, but we'll roll those out in a strategic manner and be starting to recruit for those probably in the next, probably beginning of end of spring, early part of summer, according to our initial work plan for that.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, and Jean is absent. Melissa, Teresa, haven't heard much from you all today. Any feedback, advice?
I don't have anything that anybody else didn't already say.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think it looks like a good start, and the contracting makes sense initially. I think that's something we talked about in the past, even under the other framework, that could be a way to save costs until things get rolling. So I think it looks fine.
Okay, well, don't be silent between this meeting and the next. I think part of what we'll do is send any more information, call me or any one of us from DSL, or email, but yeah, keep us posted on any further thoughts, and we're going to keep working internally on the vetting and then coming back next meeting with, I think the next step in this is costing out the positions and looking at it in the context of costs and projected revenues. So that's a February 7th information piece to be ready for. Okay, so I'm going to switch us to the next topic, which is the Oversight Board. And while I'm bringing it up, the direction from the Land Board has been basically from the get-go, public accountability, oversight, and engagement has been fundamental to the process to date, and it's going to be, all that more important to the success of any research for us to have a semi-autonomous public oversight board to be able to ensure accountability and be responsible around public transparency and engagement. Staff will be actually, the worker bees, but having a non-agency public board is something that the Land Board clearly wants us to do, that we want to do. It was always the intent to do that with Senate Bill 1546, but given that we don't have Senate Bill 1546 and that governance structure that it put in place, we have to figure this out, and figuring out what the structure of oversight is going to be and how a board would be shaped. It's a good governance exercise, and so to open it up, I guess I'll bring it up. I'm going to bring up the clean version of the draft document that we put out, and just highlight a few things. And really, I think we want the feedback, but at a high level, this model or the sketch of what a structure would look like for an oversight and governance board, it really is based on, the work that went into the Senate Bill 1546 approach. Some of the language has changed. I sent a track changes version. Basically, I cribbed a lot of the language out of the actual bill as it was enrolled and passed, or after it was passed. And then I did some track changes so you could all see what's been redacted out of there. But the bulk of the substance of the structure is really based on that and kind of hews to that board structure in Senate Bill 1546. And part of the reason for that is a lot of work went into that, and a lot of people came together to support Senate Bill 1546, and a lot of legislators from both sides of the aisle voted to pass it. And so it never really got off the ground in terms of the board that was in the agency that was authorized there, but there's a little bit of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. And, a lot of people got behind that structure, and a lot of time was spent into creating that structure. So the idea is, let's not change it too much unless it really needs to be changed. And so this document, has sketches out the membership and appointment process. I flagged a few things in the comment bubbles for you all, so you might, it might trigger feedback. We still have the staggering approach to appointments. It would still be the land board that appoints members to terms 4 years, but then the staggering approach would be, start with a 1-year term and then 2, just so we don't have everybody terming out of the board at the same time. The duties and responsibilities are sketched out here. We had in Senate Bill 1546 sections of the bill, whole sections of the bill related to the mission and policies of the Elliott State Research Forest. We don't have those in statute anymore. So while this document still says, part of the duties of the board is to ensure that the mission and management policies for the Elliott State Research Forest are implemented, those policies and the mission don't necessarily live anywhere in statute anymore. And so we have to figure out what to do about that. And, any advice there is welcome. So that's that flag in this document. And then, the role of the board in public participation and transparency around decision-making is expected to be carried out by staff in terms of the mechanizing or realization of the process, but the oversight role is really intended to be with the board, and the board would reflect what in these duties or these approaches here, what the staff would make sure happens. So last bit of to touch on here before I really just want to open it up and see what feedback you all have. Since the board is no longer a formal state agency board or commission, that's tied to overseeing a state agency, the land board is that for DSL. And since the forest is still parked within DSL and being managed by DSL, this board would be structurally different. So we need to continue vetting the extent to which this board would be able to approve or deny things that are ultimately under the purview of the land board as DSL's, agency board. So we may need to revise this some, but for now, for very draft purposes, This is written similar to the way it was in Senate Bill 1546 in terms of all the things that could come back to the board duties. So I'm going to stop here. There's some other notes that are more details around just resolving circular logic in here. Sorry, this last flag, the number of meetings that the board would all have annually. And this is not a, this edit was done from Senate Bill 1546, which said at least 6 meetings per year. This draft has it at 5, and the intent is not to like hit on a magic number, but to spur some discussion with you all about what really is realistic in terms of the cadence and volume of board meetings and board work, because it does relate to how much capacity we have to operationalize this thing. So then the last bit, this is state land board's role, and this is part of Senate Bill 1546 as well. And you'll see throughout this document, so the state land board would still have a role related to the Elliott State Research Forest, and the kind of roles and duties are what they were in Senate Bill 1546. And Oregon State is still reflected in this document, knowing that we still have to have this and resolve this conversation about whether they'll be the research entity, but they're still threaded throughout this document based on, that was the reality and could still be the reality. So we'll figure it out. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I can come back to this document anytime based on, you all just tell me where to go in the document and what you want to wade into. But I guess the hope is to get your feedback on, is this the right starting place? I mean, basically taking it from Senate Bill 1546 and translating it into the approach to what would become the Elliott State Research Forest Board. Anybody want to weigh in on that one? Would you start somewhere else?
I think Bob
I was
Salinger
getting a
has
hand
his
from
hand up.
Bob.
Yeah, no,
All right.
I think it's the right approach. I mean, I think, as you noted, a lot of work went into it. I think it actually has started to gel and work relatively well in a lot of places. There's still some rough edges for sure. I don't think the land board wants to take back sort of the hyper responsibility that it had, so I think a board that's really doing the work. I don't really care whether it's 6 or 5 meetings a year. I wouldn't go any lower than that. I think I'm assuming there's going to be subcommittee meetings and other things in the next couple of years that we're going to have to deal with as well. But I do think we're going to need some relatively regular meetings to start to get into the groove of being responsive to the community as well, and kind of making sure that we're daylighting stuff as it goes. But I think the legislation went through a ton of vetting, and God, I think 2 years of work but went into getting that legislation done. So I wouldn't want to start over for sure.
Thanks, Bob. Helpful. Mike.
Yeah, I think it's a good start. I think one thing that I would, as you go through each section, make it really clear as to who has authority to approve what. And does the land board say have authority to override what this particular board has, just to make it clear so that there isn't any problems down the road, and this board saying, yes, we approve this, and then something else coming up later, well, no, it can't be approved. You don't have that authority, that sort of thing. Just be real clear who has authority to do what. And if part of this particular board's function is as provide input to the land board as opposed to making a decision that becomes final, then that should be stated in there somewhere too. But if this board's decisions are final, that's just needs to be noted so that there's no question.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mike. Good stuff. Alyssa.
I'm gonna agree with Mike. That was what I noticed too when I read it. I think given the change, I do wonder, I mean, whether all of the board duties and responsibilities are still exactly correct. And do you even want to call this a board of directors? Because there's an implication, with board of directors of a certain scope of authority. Is that still the correct scope of authority of what the board holds, or are we a board of advisors? Or something else? Yeah, I just think in this case, words really do matter. And
Yeah.
we need to be careful to make sure it's exactly right as we're starting out, or you're going to end up, I think we're going to end up with nothing other than confusion and some hurt feelings.
Get
It'll be
enough
like
of
a
that in this
3-year-old's
world.
birthday party. Thanks.
Well, and can we play this one out a little bit more? Because I'm curious if Melissa, you have any opinion on the way it should go, like board of advisors or board of directors, and because that really does relate to, in my mind, does this board have the authority to approve or deny anything, or is it basically providing advice to DSL and DSL can act or not act on it with its own, to its own peril? Do you have an opinion on which way you want it to go, and how about others?
I think that's exactly the question is, does this board have the authority to direct the DSL director to do something or not do something? I would argue that you probably need to go back to Matt and ask him, because there's probably something in state law that answers that question already, regardless of how we feel about it.
Yeah. I think about, and Mike, sorry, I'll just fill this in really quick because it's on point, I think. Yeah, we need to vet this with DOJ as well and in the land board offices. On some of the things in this document, I don't know if you saw it, but it's clear, like in the budget process, this board doesn't approve DSL's budget, but whether there's a step for approving a budget related to the Elliott, and then that goes into, or saying something about the budget for the Elliott, and then that goes into the agency's larger budget, which gets approved and advanced through the process to the land board. There's kind of I think some of you, I'm sure, have had experience with this, but some agencies like Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife have the External Budget Advisory Committee, or the EBAC. And they have a direct budget role in the process, but these are all I think this is part of what we need to sort out. So as part of that, Mike, sorry.
No problem. So I was curious, how does the South Slough board work as far as authority to approve, disapprove, and where does all that land?
Yeah, I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question. So what I know about it, and this is probably you're through a question assigning homework. I can bring back more info, but Bill and others might know something more than this. I know they have a management board, and DSL's director sits as the chair of the board, and then they have assigned seats on the board. As to whether the board can direct the DSL director, I don't know structurally how they do it. And Bill, I don't know if you have a quick answer on it, but we can find out.
My quick answer is I don't know.
We'll find out.
I have a quick answer. So,
Oh, good.
as Brett said, Vicky is the chair of the South Slough Management Commission, and then the other members of the commission are appointed by the governor. They're the reserve's immediate governing body, and they establish policies and administrative rules for the reserve. So that is the high level scope that I am, yes, reading off their website.
Thanks, Allie. I mean, Mike, do you have an opinion on, or if not you, starting with you since you're the last to talk, do you have an opinion on how this should go?
Well, because of the high level and scrutiny that this area is going to be getting, I don't necessarily have an opinion on how it should go, but I think it just needs to be really clear. The board needs to have some authority, otherwise it is just literally just an advisor, and if that's what we're looking for, then that's fine. But essentially, the bottom line is, where does the buck stop? When if a decision is made by whoever, and people out there in the public don't like it, where do they go to challenge it if that's the case? And if it's not real clear, then it could get really muddy as to who's in charge. I guess is what really need to iron out. So I don't really have an opinion one way or the other, whether it's just strictly advisory or actually has authority, but it just needs to be clear.
Yeah, well said. I see some head nodding. Bob, yeah, Bob, I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the buck needs to stop mostly with the board, with the Elliott board. I think that first of all, I don't think the land board wants to be dealing with the Elliott and the issues of the Elliott. They've said that over and over and over again. In fact, they wanted to get rid of it altogether from, just get out of their hair. And so I think that would be a huge mistake. I don't think they have time, resources, energy. That's why you have a board. I think that we should be moving towards something that's functions like the ODF&W Commission or the Board of Forestry or whatever, where we are the primary entity, and the public knows, and we have meetings that accommodate the public and so on. Although I think this will be much easier. I think we have a much simpler and more confined area to work within, obviously. And I think the model that we actually set up in the legislation is pretty good. I think there's a couple of things that probably do want to go to the land board for final approval and review. But I think we put in caveats there too. It wasn't to really revisit it so much, but to kind of make sure there were no big things that were misaligned with either the purpose of the Elliott or the state in general. It wasn't to have kind of a second big bite at the apple for the public either. But it did make sense at some level for the land board to have kind of final say. So I would really urge us to stick with what we came up with. I think it was pretty well thought out and translates well to the challenges of kind of this new structure. I also add too, I think, just what I heard from a lot of different constituencies was they liked the idea of this sort of Elliott unit and it with its own board. And that I think appealed to a lot of folks. I think that was well received. I don't want to speak for constituencies other than the one that I've been working with the most, but just the general sense was people kind of like this idea. It worked for people.
That's helpful, Bob. So yeah, at least one voice for a strong board model. Part of this, I guess, just saying it out loud, depending on which way this goes, it may be part of a conversation about the need for future legislation. If you all think something should happen that we're hearing or we don't have the authority to do, then that's I think the next step conversation is, do we need to talk with the legislature? How about others on this this question of the authority, or how much power does the board have?
Yeah, I'm with Bob. I think ultimately as much buck stops here with the board is the better process. As much as policy, state and DSL policy allow, and I think he's right. I don't think the land board wants to be dipping their toe in this on a frequent basis. And I think that they would be more than pleased if a good board was handling as much as they could.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah,
Jack or Teresa?
I'm on that same page with Bob and Keith. I think the point about the public having faces to where they identify direction with the Elliott is an important one. As to whether that means that there needs to be new direction down the road or legislation or whatever. I agree with those comments.
How about, let's see, Teresa, I don't think we've heard from you. What do you think? You have a thought?
I agree. I mean, I agree with what everybody has said so far. I do think it makes sense for the board to have decision-making abilities, like I guess like the last couple of people have said. I do also though think that even if it was just in an advisory capacity, say like advising that these decisions be made by either DSL or the land board, I think it would essentially function the same. The decisions are, I think the board is who people are going to see as making the decisions, whether it's formally approved by the board or formally approved by DSL or the land board. But either way, it just needs to be clarified, and probably simpler if the board has the authority.
Okay, helpful.
Hey, Brett, one last thought too. I mean, part of the goal was to make the Elliott more of a collaborative effort too, to build that kind of relationships and work through issues. I don't think you do that at the land board level. I think you do it through more of a board like this too, and I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle. I think we want to get there. I think it's bringing together folks that span the spectrum of stakeholder interests and having them have this framework that we put together over multiple years to work within, but to try and get, there's going to be lots of stuff within that to try and figure out how to do it well and how to evolve this forest. So I think that the land board also can't do that. They're not going to sit around and think about that on a regular basis. They're going to get a question and they're going to work through it in a very utilitarian way, which is all they can do at that level, really.
Yeah, so the role of this board being important in the partnership building and, collaborative partnership building. Yeah, okay. Does anybody have an opinion on what isn't in this document? I guess first off, knowing that this is the first meeting where you all are discussing this draft document, it's obviously it's a 6-page document or a 5-page document. So please provide any further input, between this meeting and the next meeting. And the intent was just to get a straw draft document out there for you all to chew on. So yeah, keep chewing, please, and don't be idle during or between meetings, knowing that, you may not have read this through as much as you'd like yet. What we don't have in here is, and I guess what I've heard pretty consistently as being something that folks liked and they thought would work well, is the nature of the positions on the board. And so that's one part of the statute that I didn't crib when putting this document together, or at least I don't think I did. It's, the board consisting of 7 to 9 members. And the approach was not to basically carve out a seat or set of seats for any one given constituency. It wasn't set up as like one county commissioner, one environmental NGO member, one member of a federally recognized tribe, and yada yada yada. It was crafted much more broader in terms of the interests that would be represented on the board. Does anybody, I guess, feel like that structure should be any different? See Bob's hands up, but Melissa looks like she's
I
going
would
to say something.
heartily object to revisiting this topic, Brett.
Good. All right. Well, I'm testing the waters. Okay.
And I would more heartily object than Melissa would. Or
Wow.
or as heartily as Melissa would. How's that?
Yeah, I'd hate
Leave
to
it
see
alone.
you fight that out.
And I would more
Okay.
heartily reject it than Melissa and Keith.
All right.
Just
All right.
like,
Question asked. And anybody else does anybody want to throw in a different answer than that? I wasn't asking for any reason other than to vet it. It's not in the document, but that's not for any reason other than I probably just wasn't thinking about it when I put the document together. Okay. Well, any other feedback on management or oversight structure? I think I'll come back to it with a pause in a second, but just so you all know, the intent is we need to be taking something back to the land board on what the proposed management structure would be, but also the proposed oversight structure would be for a board. And I'll get into this a bit more about what to expect on February 13th at the land board meeting. The thought is in April, the board would be, or the land board rather, would be kind of viewing where things land on a proposed structure for a board and deciding whether that's the structure it wants to adopt, given that it would be appointing members to it. And then in June, members would be appointed to a board. So that's kind of the forecast of next steps on this one. But as much structure as the attempt in this document is to really just put some clear structure and language together so that expectations are clear. And the feedback around like making sure decision making is clear, where the buck stops, we'll take that back and make sure the document does that. Okay, that still pausing on looking for hands. Any other feedback on the draft straw dog floated on oversight board structure? Seeing none. Okay. Well, the last bit on the agenda was to two things. One, that the next meeting of this group will be on the 7th of February. And the calendar invite went out. So it's there on your calendar, and the intent would be to talk further about management structure with some numbers as well. And then talk again about the oversight board structure, and then also get into a bit more conversation about what planning looks like, operations planning, and the FMP approach would look like. and talk about that. And I think at a high level, just to daylight what we're thinking, and this also relates to the February 13th land board meeting. At that meeting, the intent is to have an informational item on the Elliott, not an action item, and to basically respond to the board's direction to bring them feedback or an update on where we are with the various pieces of the path forward for the Elliott State Research Forest that it directed at its December 13th meeting. And we've got a work plan sketch put together where, you know, we have all the 6 or so pieces outlined in there, including what we talked about today, but also the research entity conversation, which through some email back and forth and some existing conversations, we're going to continue having that conversation with Oregon State and seeing where we can go on that, ideally together. And there's also a role, one of the directives in the land board path forward is the HCP and the FMP. And so our intent is to submit revisions in response to the federal comments to the HCP by the land board meeting on the 13th, and ideally by the end of January. And then on the FMP, some of the thinking here, I alluded to it a little earlier in the meeting, is contracting, engaging some resources in an operations plan that we can start to build out between now and the end of the year that would set things up for management as soon as possible once we get permits related to the Endangered Species Act. And then also kind of setting up a bridge forest management plan. And we'll get into this more at the February 7th meeting, but the idea being Oregon State put in a lot of work and good work on the FMP that it submitted to DSL under our agreement together. And with the structure being different and DSL being the one to manage the forest, what we want to do is essentially take base work in that document, create a bridge FMP that is tailored to DSL. And that bridge FMP would be something that we would take back to the land board this summer. There's some longer term pieces in the FMP related to recreation planning and education planning. And then also partnerships, frankly, including conversations with tribes that deserve time to play out. That's the kind of stuff where the bridge FMP wouldn't be all hard and fast. We'll still have some work to do. And so while our intent would be to have an FMP through the bridge FMP, there would also be a larger process going on related to the pieces that aren't done yet. So we'll talk about that more at the February 7th meeting. But for purposes of February 13th at the land board, the intent is to do an informational update on where we are with the given work plan pieces, and then wait until April for an action on the advisory board, the oversight board structure. And then appointments would flow later than that, because the logic is you got to have a structure in place before you can appoint people to it. So I'll pause there. I wanted to be sure we just daylighted what we're thinking related to the near-term horizon here. Okay. Any advisory group members have anything further? I'm trying not to stretch time longer than we want. And I know we have a bunch of folks outside the advisory group who are in the meeting. So I'm curious if there's any public comment. But anybody from the advisory group first? Anything to share? Closing thoughts, questions? Okay. Well, yeah, and please don't be shy about feedback between this meeting and next around the documents that we've put out there for you all to chew on.
Real quick, the budget piece on those positions that you had on the org chart, did you say when that was gonna be kind of figured out?
Yeah, we'll bring back, I mean, all this will be draft for vetting, but we'll bring it back to the next meeting, Teresa, on the 7th of February. What we wanted to do today was just talk through the thinking, the structure, and the thinking behind the roles and the duties, and then sketch out what a draft org chart looks like, which we did today, and then based on feedback that we got today, but also please do just throw anything more at us between now and the 7th. But we would use that org chart as the basis to start putting dollar signs to positions and come back with some budget numbers.
Okay.
And like Bill said, that syncs up with, we're going to be before the legislature related to the 4 million that was appropriated to the Elliott State Research Forest Authority and having that move to DSL. So all of this is relevant, timely, important to that conversation too. Okay, I saw Peggy. Thank you, Peggy, for signaling your intentions in the chat. So Peggy's just listening, no comment. Do we have anybody else in the room, the virtual room here, who wants to make a comment? Okay. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. Well, 5 minutes back in the afternoon. I guess the last thing I want to say is thanks. It's something less than frozen pipes and falling trees and other physical catastrophes, but the Elliott's no joke. So thank you all for the continued engagement, and we need it. So I guess from our end, we're doing a lot of work within DSL on this, but we need you and want you. And thanks, Bob, for verifying that. Thought you'd say that. But yeah, thank you. We need you, and it's helpful. So please continue to give it your all, and it'll be appreciated.
Thanks, Brett, and thank you all for all the work you guys are doing on this.
Thank you, everybody,
Yeah,
for your engagement.
Ever forward. Clarity will come.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.